Welcome to this recorded Food Action Group's presentation, which shares findings from our focus group sessions held in regional and remote communities across Western Australia in 2023. This presentation will focus on participants' perceptions of food supply throughout WA. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm dialing in from and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The Food Action Group's project aims to address food security in regional and remote communities of Western Australia. Food security being a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and preferences for an active and healthy life. There are 6 different dimensions of food security, and within each dimension there are a number of determinants that influence a person's ability to be food secure. For example, at the food availability dimension, we need to make sure that food is available for people in outlets or alternative food networks, and that food is a sufficient price and of good quality. At the food access dimension, we have social support networks which are important to help people with social access to food, and the distance to outlets in terms of how far people need to travel to access their food. At the food utilisation dimension, we have nutrition, knowledge and cooking skills. So once people have found food, they've been able to access it, this is about using it in an appropriate way to maximise nutrient needs and prepare food safely. Here we also have IT and technology literacy, so sufficient access to knowledge to use technology to complete activities such as ordering groceries, finding recipes and interpreting nutrition information. Then we have the stability of the first 3 dimensions, being food availability, access and utilisation. This can be impacted by influences such as weather, political factors and economic factors such as fluctuations in the economy which impact the price of food. The agency dimension refers to the capacity of individuals and groups to exercise control over their own circumstances. So people having ownership about the food they're eating and having a voice to shape policies around food security. Finally, the sustainability dimension refers to the food system practices that respect and protect the ecosystems. So these are those practices that contribute to long-term regeneration of the environment to ensure that people's current food needs are met without compromising food needs for people in the future. As you can see, food security is a complex problem and addressing it requires a collaborative and dynamic approach. And food action groups are one potential solution to improve food security issues in regional and remote communities. Food action groups are a mechanism to bring together stakeholders that work across the food supply chain to co-create solutions to local food problems. These types of groups, often known as food policy councils or local food partnerships, have been operating for around 20 years in countries like the USA, Canada and in the UK. Some examples of the stakeholders that are often part of food action groups include people from agriculture, education, health, government, social services, emergency food relief organisations, retailers and community members, among others. And these groups may work to address issues across the whole food supply chain or focus on just one particular part, such as food access. They may operate at a state or a local level. They may be embedded within government or separate to. They may be volunteer run or employ paid staff. It really depends on their local context and community needs. Our team wanted to learn more about their work, so we conducted a scoping review to explore the impact these food action groups are having on local food systems in high-income countries. And we found these food action groups are positively impacting food systems across the globe through a range of activities. Some of their impacts and activities include increasing food system equity through decreasing reliance on but also increasing the quality of charitable food. This may be in the form of a social supermarket, a more dignified approach to charitable food, where people pay a membership to access low-cost food items. They're also increasing knowledge and demand for healthy food through education programs around growing or preparing healthy foods. They're also increasing access to healthy food through advocating to local governments to include food-related objectives in local strategies such as public health plans. They're also increasing environmental sustainability through surplus food projects or working with restaurants or cafes to try to decrease their waste through award schemes, education and training. And finally, they're supporting food system resiliency and increasing economic development through local food procurement strategies, so getting locally grown foods into hospitals, aged care and prison meals to support local farmers and communities to retain that economic benefit. No Food Action Group model exists in WA, so in 2023 we held stakeholder and community focus groups throughout regional and remote towns across the state to hear people's thoughts on whether a food action group could help to improve food security in their community. We know the issues affecting food across WA are quite diverse, and so understanding local context is important. So at these focus groups we asked questions like, what does a good food supply chain look like to you? What are the local food problems in your community? But also, what's working well in the current food supply chain? 92 participants attended 19 focus groups across WA. Each session was recorded using Microsoft Teams, and once all the sessions were completed, the team analysed the data to see what common themes developed. I will now share some of these findings from a statewide perspective. In terms of good food supply, participants valued sustainable local food access and affordability. This included being able to access food at the right price in their local region and buy locally grown foods. They also valued food literacy, including consumer education to support healthy food choices. There was also the themes of home and community food growing. For example, home growing was noted as an important educational mechanism to teach kids and families about horticulture and growing fresh produce for immediate consumption. They also valued adaptable and efficient food production and supply. For example, producing food was valued even in small quantities at home, as was creating short food supply chain markets. Participants from across WA also talked about how they valued culturally appropriate food in safe spaces and connection to land, such as incorporating bush foods into the food supply chain. There was also the theme of food supply actor relationships, for example, mutually beneficial relationships between colleagues within the food supply chain. They also valued managing food waste, such as having more streamlining across food producers and food relief agencies. And finally, they valued strong food supply training pathways, workforce and champions. For example, farmers and food supply chain workers were described as essential to support food production, processing and distribution. We also asked participants about what problems they perceive as impeding their local food supply chain. And when we talk about the food supply chain, we're looking across primary production, processing, distribution, access, consumption and waste. So from a primary production perspective, barriers included aspects like red tape or regulations and lack of understanding about traditional foods. At the processing stage, barriers included the lack of local facilities and jobs. At food distribution, there was long food supply chains and limited options for small producers. Barriers to food access included high-cost food and poor food quality. Consumption barriers included lack of nutrition literacy, food skill sharing, and resources for people to understand food quality. And finally, barriers to waste included aspects like food safety regulations, lack of staff, and reliance on volunteers. Then we also asked participants about what's working well across their local food supply chains. In terms of primary production, participants talked about communities supporting agriculture, farmers' markets, or places to buy locally produced food. At processing, some people were processing their own food. At distribution, participants spoke about employment opportunities and food outlets selling locally produced food. Enablers to access included online shopping, local markets, and emergency food relief options. Consumption included awareness of food origin and nutrition and education programs, and things like the Buy West Eat Best campaign. And finally, enablers around waste included actions like emergency food relief services, collecting food and redistributing to people in need. Overall, this study revealed food action groups were desired by our participants. And taking these findings into consideration, food action groups could support advocacy for or direct implementation of place-based activities to address the local relevant food issues. Activities could include increasing opportunities for locally produced food to be sold within WA communities, which would enhance food availability, the quality of food, and help to reduce food prices. Food action groups could also assist with enhancing food literacy skill building across various settings such as schools, workplaces, and community. Advocating for food processing opportunities in regional areas that also support increased employment opportunities is another potential activity. And finally, facilitating better waste and recycling options. This brings us to the end of this Food Action Group's presentation, which summarised our participants' perspectives on a good food supply and barriers and enablers to food supply in regional and remote communities in WA. We would like to acknowledge our project partners and funders, which are listed here. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us. You can also follow us on Facebook to keep up to date with the project and head over to our website to access a variety of resources.